First, we're going to hear from Nusrat, who is from Bangladesh, and then Sami from Pakistan. Both of them are going to be talking about climate change. Nusrat, I think, is Nusrat with us? So we have the irony of the fact that she's facing a major cyclone, so she may not be able to join us, even though she's talking about climate change. It may be difficult for her to connect easily, but I think she's on the line. Nusrat, I think you're with us by phone at least. And then we have Mohammed, who is another person who's facing some challenges. He's a refugee from Afghanistan, was in Iran up until recently, and things got a little hectic there, as you may or may be aware. But he is, as far as he's told me recently, I don't think he's in on this call, but he's at a UN refugee camp in Cyprus. So different situation for him. Then Mulba is going to be talking about civil war and its impact on his family. Esma, who is joining us from Georgia, will be talking about belonging, and Cynthia about disability and ability, Chirunim about human trafficking, he's joining us from Nigeria, and Gustavo about migration and opportunity. So I did make a note that some of these stories do entail descriptions of violence, and so just as a forewarning, in some case, in at least one case, it's a bit jarring. And so I would not recommend having any kids in on this conversation today. So I'm slowly but surely kind of admitting people as people come in, but let me share with you a couple of other housekeeping things before we turn to the stories. So let me post here a couple of other things. So as you hear the stories here in the Zoom chat, I would appreciate it if you could share your questions and your comments. We do record these. This allows us to get a sense of what people are thinking. This session is going to be structured in 4 parts. We're going to hear 4 stories. They're all pre-recorded, precisely because there are connection issues in some parts of the world. We wanted to ensure that you could hear them and hear them clearly. So you're going to hear the 4 first stories first, then discussion, then the last 4 stories, then discussion. So that's the way things will be structured. And the last thing is, for those of you who may be new to this, you are more than welcome, and you're indeed encouraged to click that link in the Zoom chat that I put in there for our Family Diplomacy Initiative to learn more about it and about the ways that you can get involved. Okay. With that said, and without further ado, again, for those of you who are new to this, please introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat, your city, your country, and whatever else you'd like to share about yourself. And Yaz, I assume you'll be kind of reaching out to people privately, asking them for their Facebook profile and your email, because we'd like to keep you in touch with what we're up to and the development of this growing family diplomacy initiative. All right, if everybody's ready, I'm going to share my screen. And start with the first story. And this again is from Nusrat in Bangladesh about climate change.
This is the story of Abdul Kalam, who lives on the bank of the river at Borishal, Bangladesh. He once had everything, including a big home, adequate food, farmland, and cattle. He was a happy person with a big family. But the darkest period of his life started last year. Within a year, he lost everything. Now he lives in a mud-built small kitchen with his family on the bank of the river. Yes, this is the story of a homeless family. I talked to Abdul Kalam while I was visiting his place. He said, I lost everything gradually. Once I was a rich farmer, but then I became a day laborer. You see, just around 9 months ago, he lost his farmland and cattle, and 2 months ago, he lost his home because of riverbank erosion. It was monsoon season. This year, the average rainfall during monsoon season was higher than ever here in Bangladesh. And during monsoon season, it is extremely difficult to get employed as a day laborer. Therefore, he remained out of work and was staying at home. But he needs to earn money for feeding his family, even during the season of miserable weather, so that they don't starve. He and his son were preparing to go out to look for work when suddenly they heard kind of wheezing, then a big noise. As they all came out from the home, they watched waves take his home. Chunk by chunk, his home fell into river in front of his eyes, while he couldn't do anything to save his home. He said, I couldn't save any of my household staff that I bought after many years of saving my hard-earned money. It took only 5 to 7 minutes to destroy his home. Meanwhile, a lot of people gathered on that spot, and they were trying to condole them. His wife and daughters were screaming because a home is not only about a place to live or accessories. A home is a future. A home is a starting place of love, hope, and dreams. Still, they're thankful to God because this time they could save themselves. However, they're in a danger because they live in a kitchen, which is the next plot in danger of erosion damage. They feel scared at night because they don't know when it will collapse. If it crashes at night, they will die altogether. Moreover, this place is not capable of housing 6 members. They sleep on the floor. They don't have anything, nothing left for them. Now only 2 family members earn money, and they both are day laborers. They don't have any place to move, and they're not capable of buying any land or properties. I have future scenarios of loss in my head, that we will lose a lot of lands, properties, lives, and families. Therefore, this is the right time to take action instead of solely talking about this issue. So I would say, please pay attention to this crisis. Climate change is not for particular place or regions or nations. It's a crisis for everyone. The former Secretary General of the United States, Ban Ki-moon, said, climate change doesn't respect borders. It doesn't respect who you are, small and big, rich and poor. Therefore, this is what we call a global challenge, which requires global.
Oops, sorry guys. Let me get back to her story.
This is the right time to take action instead of solely talking about this issue. So I would say, please pay attention to this crisis. Climate change is not for particular place or regions or nations. It's a crisis for everyone. The former Secretary General of the United States, Ban Ki-moon, said, climate change doesn't respect borders. It doesn't respect who you are, small and big, rich and poor. Therefore, this is what we call a global challenge, which requires global solidarity. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Just one note, a couple notes. It was not deliverer, but day laborer that she was referring to. Nina, thank you. You did your best with the Nina, one of our interns, did the transcription, but she's referring to a man who became a day laborer, lost his work and his livelihood as a farmer. We are going to switch to Sammy, who is likewise talking about climate change in Pakistan. We asked our, just a little prep for this, we asked our storytellers to provide a story without editing. In Sammy's case, he did an edited video, so you'll see that it's edited. And also, some of our storytellers are just via audio, not video. That is their choice, and it depends in part on their technological resources. But so some of these stories are strictly audio and some of them are video.
Starting with the great name of Allah, who is the King of Kings and the Lord of the universe. Assalamu alaikum. I am Noman Sami from Pakistan. Today's title of my story is The Ramification of Climate Change on Families. Recalling the slumping voice of my mother is still echoing in my ear. Sami, gather all the things in a safer place, especially your high school degrees and documentation. I must confess that climate change not only affects the property, but also has immeasurable destructions on mental health. It was 28th of August, and because of heavy rainfall, most of Pakistan's areas and cities were under a catastrophic flood that caused different social and economical problems, such as we becoming homeless, losing all of our savings, or construction getting damaged, and we compelled to stay on highways and motorways. In spite of this devastating flood, 33 million people, of which 16 were children and dozens of pregnant women, suffered from waterborne disease, such as malnutrition and protection risk. My own family is on the list of those unfortunate individuals. I can't manifest the destructions of the flood that our family has been through. Surrounding my home, each and every house was under the massive flood. And people were trying to save their life for the sake of this brutality of humanity or something else. I have seen so many farmers that end their lives because the only source of living are their agricultural lands. My mom is still in shock and she is in the bed because flooding not only causes property destruction, but also have some issues that is relevant to mental health. She was suffering from severe fever and pain. It was because of the waterborne diseases. Adding to this actuality, I'm wondering if Pakistan's carbon and toxic gas emission is only 1.7% compared to the other countries, then why we are affecting most due to the global warming and climate change. 80% of carbon emission is mostly from developed nations, especially from the G20 countries. This natural unleashing of fury on Pakistan cannot be denied. It's our country, our society, our home, but in the coming future, it may be yours. On the night of the flood, I have seen everyone concerned so nearly, the leaders, businessmen, and traders. With extreme sorrow, I have to say that no one has to beg their own country. I really appreciate some international, national organizations that are volunteer and helping to the affected peoples. My family still is in the process of making the damage irreversible, but indeed it will take time. Should I call it destruction? No, it's the egotism of humanity. Should I call it an individual fault? No, the whole of humanity is involved. Should we have a blind eye on this serious problem? No, never, because it will be more undeniable issue. The basic concept is we must have to take genuine note of this catastrophe. We as a human have to take the actions through making an environment free of global warming and the toxic gas emissions. The family tree of everyone is demolished to some extent. Many have lost their life and others are struggling for economic and mental stability. So does our family. Especially my mom is still trying to eradicate those fears that she has to bear. But now we are fighting this environmental war, which is called climate change. And hopefully I and my family will win this war in the coming future. Thank you so much.
All right. We are moving on to Mohammed's story. Mohammed's story is audio. As I mentioned earlier, he is talking about refugee crisis. He is a refugee from Afghanistan, was living in Iran, and as I understand, is now in a UN refugee camp in Cyprus.
Hello guys, hope you guys are doing well. I was born between bullets and fire. There was a civil war at a time when war was happening through different parties which were supported by foreign countries. As a child, I heard gunfire and saw dead bodies every day. That time, people were not interested too much in schools because schools were not safe. Most families were scared of sending their children to schools. My dad was a commander of one party. Although he was a strict man at home, he was respected by people because of his deeds, good behavior, and supportive manner he had. He sent me to school anyway. I remember those days when I was going to school and returning home back under a sky full of bullets and harsh noise. Oh gosh. But it is a life that is not stuck in a place and at a time. It is changing, and that's the beauty. That time passed and America came to Afghanistan in 2001 and defeated Al-Qaeda. It was the start of a new world for Afghanistan. It was a golden opportunity for Afghan people, especially for Hazara ethnic minority group. And they sent all their children to schools. I was in grade 9 when my father left Afghanistan and traveled to Iran because we couldn't afford our life's expenses. I was the youngest son in my family whose responsibility was gathering the bushes and taking the animals to mountains and pastures. Well, in this way, the interest in going to school and learning grabbed people's attention. A few years later, my family left Afghanistan for Iran when I was on the verge of graduating from high school. Then I moved to Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, to take a university entrance test. Fortunately, I did it. I passed the test and I was accepted. And that was a time that new ideas, hopes sprang to my mind because of this step. Hopes and dreams of becoming my family supporter and independent have grown during my university time. While doing my university, I taught English at many centers voluntarily. After graduation, I have been teaching at some famous educational centers, and I could afford at least my own expenses. And that was, thank God. Still, I was witnessing bomb blasting and insecurity, which have started since 2009 in Afghanistan, especially for Hazara people. And my family was constantly asking me to leave everything there and travel to Iran. But I resisted and wanted to serve my people. So my shareholder and I established an English academy after years of teaching. We're working hard and we're optimistic about what we did, thinking and dreaming. We decided to expand the academy to link it to outside networks. However, my family worried and lingered on my leaving, but I was working out those dreams, hopes, and thoughts I had in my head. I was alone and far from family for around 10 years, which was tough for me. It made me cry sometimes, but I had to do something that my family could see what they had expected and spent on. While everything was happening, I fell in love with a beautiful woman and we got married. Yes, I was so happy. Not long after that, the whole country was taken by the Taliban. It brought darkness to my hometown. They entered cities and shared their inhuman beliefs. At that time, I thought I had lost everything I had built and made. Then I realized that living in the extremist regime of the Taliban is impossible. Then I moved to Iran without my wife. And now I'm living with my family. We're all doing okay here. I'm working and seeking other opportunities.
All right, so that was Mohammed, who was talking about his refugee experience moving from Afghanistan to Iran. The last of the first four stories is next. This is Mulba, who, so we're shifting from Asia to Africa. He is speaking from his experience in Liberia.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Moba Isaac Flomo, or Liberian, a youth and a child rights advocate, and I'm currently residing in our nation's capital, Monrovia. Well, I don't know how many of you want to listen to this kind of stories. I don't know how many of you who are listening today want to take this story. You will share my experience with youth all around the world. Well, I was born to traditional parents in one of Liberia's sub-political divisions called Bakolo. And it was in the heat of a civil war that lasted for about 14 consecutive years. And that civil war greatly affected my life, it affected my family, and it continuously affects my upbringing. Today, as a result of the civil war which affected my life, I had to stay in the compound of this church where I do almost everything. This is where I have my laundry. This is where I eat. This is where I sleep. This is where I do almost everything. Before the civil war, my people, my mother, my father, were people who even helped the homeless. They provided food and shelter to those who did not have, who could not afford. But today, I have not even a kind of safe place to stay because I lost them to the civil war that was fought in Liberia. And this is a story not only unique to my family, but also to 60% of our country's total population. In that civil war, my elder brother was murdered. He was killed in the presence of my mother, and that led to my mother being traumatized. And she contracted pressure, and she died in her early 40s. And I was just 2 years of age. So I had to grow up all by myself. Just a year also after the Civil War, my aunt was raped in my presence. I have lived and continuously lived in an environment that is very abusive, that is very violent. But I had to go because there is no other way out. I had to engage advocacy also as a means of getting greater opportunities, also looking at what my family went through, especially during the Civil War. Even up to the present, I live here and do almost everything here, not just because I want to do it, but because I have no other way out. My older sister also had to engage prostitution because we never had any other people to offer us anything that will help us go to school or even get greener pastures. So she had to engage prostitution, and that situation, my elder sister also contracted hepatitis B. She died in her early 30s. Now, being left as an orphan and a double orphan, homeless, hopeless, self-supported, everything, I have continuously spoken to young people to stay away from all forms of violence, but particularly tribalism, nepotism, and tribal discrimination is just one of the worst things because it was one of the major things that contributed to the Civil War, and today I still continuously bear the consequences. Today, my advocacy strength is directly aimed at speaking to young people to stay away from violence, any form of violence, but also lobbying for the establishment of war and economic transport for Liberia. And I want to be frank, I want to be clear with this, that an advocacy for this war and economic transport is not to pay back, but to set precedents that others may see and follow and be good people tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Okay, I am going to stop sharing my screen and open things up for discussion. So a little context here. So you saw, for those of you who just joined us, we're structuring this this meeting in 4 parts. You just heard 4 stories, 2 about climate change, 2 about war and its impacts on families. And so we're interested to hear about your thoughts and your questions to the storytellers who are, I think, for the most part with us. So the people you just saw are actually with us. So we'll engage in that discussion for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll move to the final 4 stories, and then we'll have a discussion of those. So those are the 4 parts: 4 stories, discussion, 4 stories, discussion. With that said, I have not been able to look at your many comments. I'm glad that many people have been contributing to the comments here, but if you could raise your hand electronically, use the electronic hand signal to ask a question or make a comment, if you would. Allie.
Yeah, this isn't a question, but I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed Sammy's story. I study international relations in school, and a big thing I study is about like refugee and migration patterns. And we were talking about in class how like climate displacement's a big thing now, but it hasn't really been officially recognized as like an actual refugee crisis by the UN. So I thought it was really interesting how you were touching on that, especially like in regards to mental health and physical health, because I think just displacement in general obviously has traumatic effects on anyone who's forced to endure that, but climate change in general like devastates people's land, especially people who rely on the land for their livelihoods. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to bring up, and I really appreciated learning more about your experience of that.
I don't know if Nusrat or
Was it
Sammy
somebody
or...
else? I'm sorry.
Go
Maybe
ahead.
I got that mixed up. My apologies.
Oh, no, you may, I don't know if you got anything mixed up, but I think you're raising an important point about the kind of linkage between, if I understand you correctly, climate change and mental health, which Sammy certainly raised, but I'm trying to figure out if Nusrat is able to hear us, because those are the 2 storytellers on climate change, and whether or not they have any comments. Nusrat,
Yeah, I'm here.
go ahead. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the link between climate change and mental health?
Yeah, Obviously, like the story I described, I mean, the man I met, and he's totally frustrated because he don't have any work, anything. And also, like I said, his wife and daughters, and they lost everything, and they're like screaming. And it's a kind of mental issue. And like the females are more connected to their home and accessories than to the men. So yeah, I would say there's some relations between the mental health and the climate change, climate issues.
Mm. And that's interesting that you're raising that it may affect women in some sense more to the extent that their lives are maybe tied to the home. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
Sammy. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, Sammy, and then Nusrat, we can come back to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, that was the story of my own. So, like, there is a obvious connection between the mental health and the devastating structure of the climate change, right? So, like, how it is connected to this, like, I would say I have experienced it by my own self. Like when I was just, I was seeing that the devastating flood, so I was completely in shock. Like I can't able to sleep properly. By the way, like it was 48 hours, 2 days, up to 2 days I was waking up, and I can't, whenever I just get to sleep, so I feel like I'm in the water, and I feel like floating in a massive flood. So that's what, like, our psychological factor was very affected through that demolishing and destructive flood. Like so many villages and so many houses were under the water, as you have seen in the illustration there on my video. So out of that feelings, we were just near to the river. So that's why, like, we feel like we are going to be under the water. So that's feelings connects the mental health. Like we were, my mother, my own mom, she was very disturbed at that time. She was not even eating food, and she gets to bed. So that's something that I can't express in words. Like words are very bound, so feelings are not bound, so I can't express it anymore. Thank you.
Nusrat, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was trying to say, like, I don't know about the Western countries, but here, like the South Asian country, and the women's are totally attached to their home, and especially they take care of their family, and they stay at home. They take care everything, including their cattle, farmland, and home, and the children. So when they lost these kind of things, and they feel totally down. And I have seen in most cases men they are strong and they can handle this situation, but in case of women, they are so down, and especially when it comes to rescue during the flood, or and that moment they even don't want to leave their house. Even they just take their take risks of their life, and they just want to stay their home with their accessories, with their everything.
Thanks for that, Nusrat. Joe Tolles, who's joining us from the United States.
I just want to thank everybody for sort of their, I don't even know if these words are right, their courage, their ability to tell these stories. It's sort of humbling to listen to the daily things that people have to put up with, in particular, in contrast to what I have to put up with, which seems ridiculous. Like, right? It's like, I just feel grateful. I guess this is part of this whole project to begin with, is I feel so grateful to connect to your humanity in a way that I never would have by watching a movie or a TV show. And, you know, I just feel like overwhelming love for you guys. I just, you know, I don't know that your strength and your courage that you exhibit every day is even something that I would have. And I'm grateful that you're here to tell your stories. I'm grateful that I don't have to tell your stories, because I don't know if I would be as strong as some of you to put up with the things that you have to. So I just really wanted to say that, because it's been very powerful.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I couldn't agree more. Other thoughts? Do you have any questions as well for Mulba, who told his rather wrenching story, some of which I did not know before I heard his story about his family and the effect of the Civil War on his family, but also about Muhammad, who was from Afghanistan, telling his story via audio about kind of the changes from pre-US involvement in Afghanistan, then US involvement, and then afterwards. So if you have questions or comments on those.
May I ask a question? It's a bit not only about like right now the situation and about his speech, like how things have changed within Afghanistan after the Talibs came in, but more about, because we also feel and see that that Iran is fairly totalitarian regime. So my question is, so is it better to live in Iran right now than in Afghanistan? And in which way? Is that like economically better, or it's also in terms of, I don't know, like politics or culture? Or I would not imagine anybody fleeing Afghanistan and going to Iran, because we have a lot of people here in Georgia from Iran who come here and say that, especially women, that it's life is impossible there. Thank you in advance.
So unfortunately, Mohammed, I don't believe is with us. Mohammed's, as I mentioned before, is in a, as far as I know, as he told me, is in a UN refugee camp in Cyprus. So I don't think his connection is all that reliable. But if there's anybody else here, I'm thinking perhaps Jim Williams, who is on our board of advisors and is focused, actually, among other things, on these kinds of things as an international education professor at George Washington University in the USA. But there may be others here who can speak to the situation in Iran and to Esma's question. Esma, by the way, is joining us from Georgia. Jim, perhaps, and then Tennille will come to you.
Sure. Well, nice to see everyone, and wonderful to hear your stories. My name is Jim Williams. As Paul said, thank you. I guess it's it would be hard to say what's in general terms, which is a more difficult living environment. It probably depends a great deal. It's kind of a hard choice, because neither one right now is really ideal in terms of supporting human flourishing across all different groups of people. And so I don't know which is worse. I'm not sure how much choice people have in going to one or the other. It probably depends a great deal on one's situation, one's gender in particular, the living circumstances one's in, one's ability to care for oneself and one's family, and a whole range of questions like that. So I doubt there's a single answer of which one is worse. In some sense, neither one is ideal for sure. And I hope we can support people wherever they are. In that sense, support, hear their stories, learn what's going on, trying to take action as we can from where we sit. So that's kind of a non-answer, but I'm not sure it's an easy question to answer. Both are difficult.
Yeah, and actually, Mohammed, I believe, just joined us. So if well, he's in the process of joining us. Mohammed, can you hear us? Mohammed, can you hear us? He may not be able to hear us easily. Yes. Unfortunately, I think his connection is not very good. Mohammed? Yeah, I think unfortunately we're gonna have to um uh, I'm gonna mute him and or hopefully I can mute him. Sometimes I'm not able to. The the issue, I think, Anya, if you could send a message to Mohammed and ask him this question, that if he can answer in the Zoom chat, because I don't think we're going to be able to hear him properly. But if you can answer in the Zoom chat, why, first of all, he moved from Iran to Cyprus. And secondly, if he can comment on whether or not, to Esma's question, life was better in Iran versus Afghanistan. Tennille.
Hi, I just wanted to thank all the presenters for today. It was really a lot to unpack, especially with Mulba. And I wanted to ask him, like, how are things now with him? I know he said he's in the church, not because, well, living there, not because he wants to, but because he has nowhere else to go. So I wanted to know, like, how he is presently. And like, for instance, like, is he able like to go to school? Does he have any more relatives that are alive? His aunt, yeah, I mean, I heard she gone. Like, how is he right now, personally?
And again, unfortunately, I think
He's gone.
Mulba is not with us. He has connection issues. I can answer a little bit because, and maybe Anya, you may be able to fill in, because Anya's had some conversations with a lot of you, and Janice perhaps as well, because those two interns of ours have been in considerable contact with our family diplomats. But what I do know is, as he mentioned, is that he lives in a church. He doesn't have a home. His family was disrupted, and many of them were killed in one way or another by the Civil War. And so he doesn't have much of a choice. He lives in that situation. As far as I know, he can't go to school. And so he's become an advocate for youth and against violence and in his country. But, you know, in a precarious situation, he's dependent on the charity of a church. Anya or Janice, do you guys have anything else to add that Mulba can't answer?
Basically just the fact that there's this term called Zogos. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, but it's considered a person who is not important to society, and it's someone who doesn't have any form of parental support. And so he says that he identifies in that group, and that he's a double orphan in the sense, and that this has affected his ability to attend school, because in order to attend school, he would have to find someone else to provide that resource for him, which he doesn't have currently.
Janice, anything else to add?
No, I don't have anything to add. Anya explained that very well.
Okay. We need to shift to the second group of stories. There will be 4 stories again. If you scroll, well, for those of you, you've been joining at different times, so I gather you may not have access, but I'll tell you briefly that the next 4 stories are Esma from Georgia, who's talking about belonging, Cynthia from Cameroon, who is talking about disability and ability, Chidunim, who from Nigeria, who's talking about human trafficking, and that story is going to be the probably the most jarring story. So I just forewarning, there's some depiction of graphic violence, and Gustavo from Costa Rica, who's going to be talking about migration and opportunity. So as we shift to these stories, just think about the commonalities and the differences between the stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these things. Before though, we go to the stories, I need to take a photo, as I usually do, of everybody. It's just par for the course. We have to document these meetings. So if you could all turn on, if you're able to, please turn on your videos briefly. We'd much appreciate being able to see you on screen. I'm going to in a couple seconds. Say 1, 2, 3, smile. Awesome. Let me take just another quick couple of photos. There are 2 screens here on my screen. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Awesome. And then because there are a couple of screens, I'm going to take just one more shot. So for those of you, Eddie, Claire, Kelly, Esma, Ashlan, Aaron, Andre, and Georgia, if you can turn on your video, that would be great. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Awesome. Thank you. I am just admitting into the room Mulba, who's been trying to join us from Liberia. Perhaps we can get his thoughts. Anya, can you do me a favor and have him just message him and give him a sense of the conversation, and if he can write a message in the Zoom chat, kind of responding to the discussion, that would be much appreciated. Okay, let me share my screen and let's turn to the last 4 stories. Esma from Georgia on belonging.
When dating my mom, my dad was bringing her bread instead of flowers, for which he had to stand long lines to get it. Georgia paid a heavy price for regaining its independence from the Soviet Union. In 1990s, there was no electricity suddenly, no running water, and no natural gas in our homes. People sold off their centralized heating as a metal, as it was not necessary and useful anymore. For that 1 hour that electricity would come randomly, people would disperse from the streets with screams of joy and rush to their homes where they could watch TV, wash their clothes, or iron things, which made my grandmother very angry because nobody would visit her store for that 1 hour. She'd been running that store for her whole life, and in my childhood included. In day and night, summer and winter, and hot and cold, with open doors. One of her clients almost killed her. He threw a glass bottle at her when she insisted that he paid the money for what he had bought, the goods. We were burning a firewood in our apartment block, which made the walls of the apartment really dark. And as a chore, I was helping and bringing little buckets of water in the home. We had to lay down in our beds in winter when we did not have that firewood to warm ourselves up. I was born in the light of a candle, and my parents were immediately told that my eyes needed treatment. Those years, only very privileged had the access and possibility to go to the West, the Europe, or the US. Therefore, the only option for my treatment seemed to be going to Russia. It seemed like going to another world those days, as there. But Georgians were viewed as second-class people. So we had to hide that we were from Georgia. It was not so hard for me as I was native Russian speaker, but always having to think, where are you talking about your home that you miss so much? Where you should be talking about it and where not should not be the reality for any child in this world. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child says that every child has the right to express freely his or her own identity. And these are not the hollow words. My mother was always and often told by her cousins to leave my father behind and move to Russia for a living, which she always refused to do. In her years, like my grandmother, who actually was against and went against my grandfather, a Soviet officer, to be restationed to Czechoslovakia to serve there, even though they would have lived much better off there, because she knew that there was a war, as she said. And she spared my grandfather from being involved in oppressing and repressing people there. As you all know, in 1968, the Soviets killed the peaceful protesters there in what was called the Prague Spring. My mother, in a similar way, has, in her younger ages, has refused to pay the bribe to the university and therefore had to move to another city out of her hometown to study. She was always challenging her lecturers who were asking why did they think so, when they were insisting under the Soviet rule that Baltic states would not be able to survive without Russia. She had never worked since I was born. In 2002, just about 20 years ago, we moved to the capital city of Tbilisi in Georgia because I needed to study in a specialized school for the blind, which is the only one in the country, and I could not study anywhere else back then. My father still has not come to terms with the reality that he had to leave his home village very far away to come here and move here. Even though in his younger ages, he had to travel even further away when he was sent off to Mongolia. Under the Soviet rule, it was mandatory for every man to serve in the military. So he was drafted and sent off there, as he refused, unlike many others, to pay the bribe to be placed in more favorable conditions and closer to Georgia. He had a dream, though, to build his own house, which nobody in my family believed he would be able to manage, but he had even drawn that house. As we did not have money to buy the apartment, he bought the plot of the land and started building. In 2003, the Rose Revolution happened. Under the new government, the lights went back on. Our school got new computers. The staff was not abusing physically children anymore. We got the textbooks in Braille or audio so that my mother didn't have to read them to me anymore all the time. Life started getting back on track when in 2008, in August, Russians attacked us again. It was few days, but a full-scale war. My father could hear and see the military planes flying over his head as he stood on the third floor of his house that he was just building. The whole country, as well as this house that we were building for 17 years, may have been destroyed. It was those days that I was imagining myself one day presenting all the evidence of injustice and crimes committed against Georgia in some international court. I was also envisioning my country where people would have jobs and homes with balconies where they could rest after their working days over. It took my father 7 years to finish up this house and us to move in. I remember standing on its terrace in darkness and thinking that just like my parents, I also had to follow their path and create some added value in this country. In my childhood, I was imagining myself fighting for basic rights and values and living in very modest and unprivileged conditions. It took me a year of living in the US in a host family on an exchange program in a private home to realize that owning a home is normal and does not mean that you are rich. Few years later, I was returning home one day. It was a sunset. My mother had come out of house to feed the kids. My father was also outside. All four of us, my parents, me, my grandmother, were together there up front, surrounded by our 4 cats. And I realized that the dream that I had for the whole country has come true for my family. It's kind of odd for me to speak about not leaving Georgia when so many people are taking the path of immigration. But I think you can have a strong feelings about the country when you have observed and watched it grow, develop, and move forward, improve and prosper together with you at the same time and pace.
Okay. The next story is from Cynthia Atemkeng from Cameroon, talking about ability and disability. It is a strictly audio story, and it's shorter. It's about I think close to 4 minutes.
My story is all about living a life with disability, and I'm from a very poor family, from a family of 5. My father was a
Sorry, guys. Let me see what's going on. Let me refresh that one. Okay, hold on a second, guys. Let me try to get back to her story.
My story is all about living a life with disability, and I'm from a very poor family, from a family of 5. My father was a disabled while my mother was not a disabled. Being a disabled is one of the biggest challenges in my life because no one wants me to go to school. Since my father does not go to school or did not go to school, living a life with disability is also a life full of hatred, a life full of depression, bitterness, and anger. Because everyone around you will see you different and look at you like another human being from a different planet. It wasn't easy for me to go to school because my family see me as a burden. So, thanks to the government who brought in a primary school around my area. At the age of 10, I had to start schooling because I sneak out of the house and go to school. It wasn't easy for me, but all thanks to my primary teacher who encouraged me all through from primary to secondary until I finished my primary and secondary. After finishing it, I had to move to another state, which was another phase in my life, another big challenge. So it wasn't easy. I moved to the university, applied to the university the first year. I wasn't accepted because of my disability. It wasn't easy for me, but I had to accept it. But I did not give up because I know how important education is in the life of persons with disability. Upon the next year, I had to still move to that same state to apply in the university. When I applied in the university, I had to do thorough advocacy for the right of persons with disability to make the lecturer to see how important it is for persons with disability to go to school. I advocate. Sometimes I will move to their offices, they will throw me out. So we even ask their secretary to tell me they are not around. It wasn't easy for me, but all thanks to a persistent advocacy, the vice chancellor in the University of Boya, Cameroon, had to accept that persons with disability should be given a free scholarship to school in the University of Boya till they finish. This scholarship was all about at the level of the PhD. It wasn't easy, but all thanks to God. Due to that fact, I had to create a small foundation which is all about advocating for women's rights, women's with disability. It wasn't easy, but all thanks to God Almighty, who was there on my side. I just want to end my story by saying that disability is an inability. Disability is not a curse. Disability is a blessing. So why not allow your children with disability to go to school, especially in the African country? Let persons with disability go to school. It is our rights. Everybody is equal. Nobody is different from the other. So I will end here and I say thank you to everybody.
Okay. So we are turning to the third of fourth stories. And this is Chidunim from Nigeria. I just want to forewarn you, there are some graphic portions of this story. So if you have kids around, you may not want to have them around.
What does it mean to leave your country in military dictatorship in search of better life in Europe, only to spend the next 3 years in a terrorist detention camp in Libya? Auntie Monica lived in Lagos with her 28-year-old husband, Mr. Timothy, and her 3-year-old son. She had a store where she sold bread and milk and eggs and groundnut oil. Her husband, Mr. Timothy, was the neighborhood electrician, and together they made enough money to run the family. Auntie Monica went to a business seminar one day, and on this business seminar, she was approached by a man who introduced himself as Barrister Adewale, the visa guy. Barrister Adewale told her his firm was in the visa procurement business and he could help her get a visa to Europe, as he has done for thousands of his clients. And for just 500,000 naira, he could even get her a job. He was convinced. She paid the money to Barrister Adewale to get the visa for herself, her husband, and her 3-year-old son. And on 19th October 1995, the family started their journey to Europe. On reaching Agadez, there was no water. They were tired, and even worse, Barrister Adewale was nowhere to be found. In the traveling crew, the 115 Nigerians, 20 Beninese, 12 Ghanaians, traveling by road from Nigeria to Europe. Now they were miles deep into the Sahara Desert, traveling by a speeding open van, and they had no drinking water. Trouble started. The travelers started to argue among themselves. Some were crying. Some who died of suffocation were thrown out of the speeding open vans into the desert. And others rained endless curses on Barrister Adewale, saying he had deceived them. This continued until they were rescued by a group of men in military uniforms who took them to a camp and gave them water. This made the travelers feel safe and relaxed, so next they were waiting for food. It was when the first man among them who had the courage to ask for food was shot. That was when they realized that the men who had rescued them were not the military, but terrorists. They had gone from frying pan to fire. Auntie Monica shook her head as she expressed to me that this was the biggest shock her husband received as an electrician. And so they started their ordeal in the terrorist camp. As they were starved, they were beaten. Some died. Her 3-year-old son was snatched from her hands. And when her husband tried to protest this, he was tied up and he was beaten till he coughed out blood. And she watched her husband cry in despair. And she wished for death to come quick upon her. Later, Auntie Monica was separated from Mr. Timothy, her husband, and taken to a room where she was given a loaf of bread in the morning and raped multiple times within the day. Once when she got pregnant, her pregnancy was aborted by a woman in the company of the terrorists. She did this by putting a peg into the vagina of Auntie Monica and twisting it anti-clockwise till she screamed and bled profusely. This humiliation and torture continued for 3 years until the terrorist camp was discovered and attacked by the federal forces of Libya, and the terrorists left them and ran away. So they were rescued and they were taken to the hospital. Here, upon examination, it was confirmed that Auntie Monica was 3 months pregnant. She decided to keep this pregnancy and return to Nigeria to start back again. It was upon her return to Nigeria that she learned that Barrister Adewale works with a network of traffickers who steadily transported Nigerians to Libya with the guise of giving them a better life in Europe. So I would say, whenever you see an opportunity that seems too good to be true, then it actually is. And whatever opportunity you get, you should do due diligence by confirming from relevant government agencies and getting information for your own safety and for the safety of your family. Thank you very much.
Okay, the last story we have is not so heavy, but it is a similar story of migration, and it is from our man from Costa Rica.
Hi
Gustavo.
everyone, I am Gustavo, and this is my story. Originally, I come from this small country in the middle of the American continent, Costa Rica. It's really small, but I guarantee you, it's there. I grew up in Costa Rica. You see, this is me growing up. Also, these are some of my favorite people in the entire world, my sisters. I also have an extended family that I love very much. This is them years ago. We have gotten older though. I have nephews and nieces now. Also, my extended family has grown older and bigger. Now, Costa Rica is known for having beautiful natural places, for being a peaceful country, and also for being conservative. I don't live in Costa Rica right now. I live right here in Boston, Massachusetts. And I don't live with my family anymore. I live alone. Now, you might be thinking, Gustavo, why would you leave a place so beautiful and a family that you love so much to live in a place where no one knows you and that is slightly less beautiful than Costa Rica? Well, some might feel familiar with my answer because coming from a small country, it means that your economy is also small and therefore less opportunities to grow. Also, coming from a conservative country, it means that people will want to tell you how to live your life. Can you imagine that? Daniel, I get you. So, years ago, I decided that the best way to go was to leave Costa Rica. But before coming here, I came right here to Malawi, the warm heart of Africa. And there, I live in a refugee camp. Crazy, right? I live with many people who had to leave their countries, sometimes to save their lives, but mostly to have a better future for themselves or their families. After living there, I was lucky enough to come here and study. And then I found a job helping people that, just like me, are looking for a better opportunity for themselves and for their families. Now, you might be thinking, Gustavo, are you trying to help people find what you are trying to find? Well, who knows? I might be able to help a lot of families with my experience. And also, maybe one day I will be able to go back to Costa Rica and be with my family and grow older together. Now, this is my story. I hope that you have enjoyed as much as I have enjoyed all your stories. And take care and be safe. Bye.
Okay, guys, that was the last of our stories. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open things up for discussion. So once again, if you can raise your hand electronically, use the little hand button to ask any questions or make any comments based on the stories. And note if you see any kind of similarities or differences or things that you particularly liked, and what, just be, if you could, precise about what you liked about particular stories. Who wants to go first? Tennille, you've got your video suddenly went on.
Yeah, I was listening to it before, and then I think for me it was a lot to unpack with Suriname and with his aunt. And I don't know how old is the kid now that her aunt had. And if probably he asked any questions like, okay, like who's my dad? As normal children would ask, if they look different, if they act different, do they treat the kid any differently? And probably like how old he is. Yeah, and how it was, because he may seem like a constant reminder of the trauma they experienced for those 3 years. And yeah, so that was it. And I really enjoyed Gustavus story as well too.
Yeah.
So for Suriname, yeah, how's the kid?
Chirunim?
Okay, thanks for the question, Daniel. The kid is 23 years old now, and I actually also met him. But from what I gather, I don't think he knows like the history of his mom, because she didn't tell him this. Like she didn't tell him he probably doesn't have a father or those kind of things. So yeah, he's very lively. He's a graphic designer. He's doing well. Yeah, that's just it.
And Chirunim, is she? I don't think she's. If I remember correctly, she's not related to you, but you met her at church. And did she remarry, Monica?
No, she didn't remarry. She did not.
Okay, so she's raising her
has
son. She has one son, and she's raising her son alone.
Yes.
Okay.
I missed the age. Can you repeat? What's the age you said?
3 years old.
Oh, so that was really recent. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a bit confusing, because if I remember correctly, they made this voyage, Chirunim, back in 1995, that led to these problems. And so explain that.
Okay, they left in 1995, and she stayed in the camp for 3 years, and the camp was discovered in 1998. So yeah, by 1998, that was when they discovered she was 3 months pregnant already. So she just had to keep the pregnancy and return back to Nigeria. And she gave birth to her son in 1999.
Ah, okay. So back in 1999. So he's now, you said 30 years old.
23.
Okay, he's 23 years old. Okay, yeah, my math was my math was wrong. I'm sorry. So he's 23 years old, not 3 years old. Other questions or comments?
May I just also add something? I just feel very humbled, first of all, and after all that I have heard, all the issues that I have talked about, I feel a bit, I don't know how to say that I made so much drama out of things that are not as terrible, let's say, as what was said here. That I made a deal out of these. I feel bad now about myself, but yeah, I just wanted to share this experience.
Others who've written comments, if you can chime in about the things that you particularly liked, and people we haven't heard from, it would be great to hear from. So I'm thinking I'm going to call out your names here. Lauren, Kelly, Bell or Beltina, and others. Suzanne, Kayla, there are others that we have not, that we don't actually have not heard from before. So I'm thinking in particular of, let me see here. Hold on a second. Kayla, Claire, and Andre. But so we've got a few hands raised. Anya, then Itai.
Gustavo, I thought your use of the map and then the different photos really worked for your story. And I thought that you had this really inviting tone coupled with a little bit of humor in there. which kept the entire audience engaged. And I just thought you did a really nice job. And it was great to be a part of your story progression and to see that both through all of the work that you've done to develop it, and then to actually have photos to understand the different markers of your journey. I thought that was just really well done.
Same goes for Chirunim on that. Itai? Itai's
Hi guys, I'm
yeah,
grateful.
Itai is joining us from Zimbabwe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was just want to say thanks guys for presenting us. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say to guys who have presented their stories, they are so good, and some of them they are interesting, and I just want to congratulate you so that in the way that they have been presented, it was so amazing. So keep it up, guys. That's all I want to say.
Great. Thanks, Itai. Itai is one of our other family diplomats who presented his story last Sunday. Sammy from Pakistan.
Yeah, hats off to all of you. Like genuinely, I just really appreciate the story of Gustavo. It was just fascinating and refreshing. Like the way he tells the story with his cards, with his photographs. So it was really innovative and very creative. So hats off to you, Gustavo. That's good.
Great. Thanks, Sammy. Gustavo.
Well, thank you, Sammy. Thank you all for your positive comments. This has been quite a journey. Like since we started until now, it has been first understanding how to bring message to the people, how to make yourself understood, how to communicate, how to be resourceful, which was really difficult to me because I really don't feel that I have many resources to work with, but myself. So I totally understand Shironim. I think like at some point I was just looking around, seeing like, what can I work with? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk with about my family. I have pictures I can show. I'm going with that. So that's one part of it. And the other part is about the message itself. It's really powerful to hear all of you talking and hear your stories and hear the good and the bad and the painful and the heartbreaking all together, and realize that that is life. And some of us have it like some of us are blessed, and definitely like Joe was telling, like I am so honored to hear all your stories and so glad that I got to be here. I want to thank you all for sharing, and yeah, just that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gustavo. Yeah, I echo your sentiments. Suzanne, you had your hand raised, but then took it out.
It's not very quiet where I am, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk. I'm going to repeat what Beltina said in the chat, but I feel privileged and honored that everyone is willing to share their very personal stories, and very moving, all of them. Chironim for obviously the survival that you showed. I love the way you told the story and the passion about the survival that people exhibited in their ability to survive, to get through what they went through. But and Cynthia and your resilience and grit in really difficult circumstances to go ahead and try to start a nonprofit. And Esma, you just, as I said, when we did training 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, you really have a way with words and language. It's yeah, the really terrific use of English language. And then I loved Gustavo's because it was nice to have your come on the end, because even though I think your story probably had some hardships and it had some difficulty, some heartbreak, you were able to tell it in a way that was upbeat and positive, and that, so that was appreciated. And I think you can't miss that there was a subtext of challenge to leave your family, and a sacrifice, but you were able to show grit in the way you told it. So I like that. Thanks.
Joe from the USA.
I just want to address something that Esma said, and I hope that it was just maybe a different wording she meant to use when she said she feels bad about herself for the story that we told. And the one thing that I'll say is that as we listen to other people's stories, it's absolutely okay to honor those, but to remember that our stories are not in comparison. They are stories that impact us as well. And we need to honor that as well, that the things that impact us shouldn't make us feel lesser or better than anybody else. And I think that is one of the main things that has come out of this for me, is that I'm part of a family. And, this has been a pleasant, emotional experience of learning more about each one of my family members. And it's made me, hopefully it's made me a better person.
Yeah, that's awesome, Joe. There's a reason why Joe is on our board of directors, as well as one of our family diplomats, because I think he really gets the understanding of what this is all about, which is kind of sharing stories from all of you in different parts of the world, some difficult, some funny, some heartwarming. But it's really important for us to be telling these stories in part because we live in a world where people are trying to take advantage of differences to advance political ambitions, and in the process are undermining our ability to understand each other across our lines of difference. And so the Family Diplomacy Initiative is very much about that. About bringing us together across our lines of difference. So we are at time. I want to kind of finish off by just encouraging you to stay engaged. What is going to come next for those of you who are interested is, if all goes well, Joe Tolles, who just spoke, will be actually continuing with a group of people who are interested in kind of continuing to develop their stories. We will, the training ends officially this year on October 30th, so next Sunday. Next Sunday, we will gather together the family diplomats and our interns and volunteers to kind of reflect on this this training that started on July 10th and is ending next Sunday. Next year, we will do another training, which will bring in new family diplomats, as well as invite our existing family diplomats to continue to develop their abilities as storytellers and as family diplomats. I want to remind you all that part of what we're trying to do in the long term is to empower more people across the world as family diplomats, and to ultimately connect these family diplomats, trained family diplomats, with governments, businesses, media, and nonprofits to be able to advocate effectively for families across the world and the different issues that they face in different parts of the world. So that's really the kind of long-term vision and what we're working towards. And we're currently in the kind of focused training phase of the development of the Family Diplomacy Initiative. So with that said, thank you all for your participation. I really want to thank our family diplomats first and foremost. Many of you especially live in difficult circumstances, whether you're facing climate change or you're facing the legacies of civil war or other violence or economic difficulties, and somehow you continue to manage to take part in our meetings. That's why I want to encourage you to continue. We want to give you a platform and a voice to develop yourselves as family diplomats. I also want to thank our interns. Many of our interns were involved in different aspects of making this happen. Nina helped with translation or transcription of a number of the stories so that you could read as well as listen. Yaz was busy kind of accounting for who's participating and who's attending these different meetings to be able to track our records. Anya and Janice have been gathering information about each of you, our family diplomats. And we've had many of our other interns, so Chanel, Ali, et cetera, have been helping in other ways with making sure that we get your stories and get them uploaded so that we could have this event and it happened relatively smoothly without except for my couple of screw ups. So I want to thank you all for your time, and keep in touch through the Family Diplomacy Initiative on Facebook. That link, we are bringing more and more people across the world there, and we will continue to communicate with you, and we will share the video recording of this meeting, and we will be introducing our storytellers, our family diplomats, little by little over the coming weeks. All right, everybody, thank you so much, and see you soon on Facebook. Bye.
Thank you.